In the darkest corners of the galaxy, where even starlight fears to venture, there exists a name that makes entire fleets change course. A whisper that turns hardened warriors into trembling children. A call sign that has become legend among 1,000 species. They call him Planet Killer. But Marcus Chin looks nothing like the monster the aliens expect. Sitting in that prison cell, gray-haired and weathered by age, he appears to be just another broken human relic from the war that ended decades ago. The young Krex assassins see an easy target, an old man whose species was supposedly crushed into submission. They have no idea they're about to wake something that should have stayed buried. Because some humans aren't meant to be forgotten. Some humans are meant to be feared. And when the galaxy remembers why humanity once ruled the stars, even the darkness itself will tremble. The detention center on Kepler Station buzzed with the usual mix of smugglers, pirates, and political prisoners from across the galaxy. But in Cell Block 7, something unusual was happening. 3 young Krex assassins stood outside a reinforced cell, their serpentine necks craning to get a better look at the occupant inside. Marcus Chin sat on the narrow metal bunk, his back against the cold wall. His hair had gone completely gray, and deep lines mapped the years across his weathered face. To the casual observer, he looked like any other aging human, perhaps a merchant who had fallen on hard times, or maybe a low-level smuggler caught with contraband. His clothes were simple and worn, his posture relaxed. Nothing about him suggested danger. The 3 Krex assassins found this hilarious. "Look at this ancient thing," hissed Vex, the youngest of the trio. His scaled skin rippled with amusement as he pressed his face against the energy barrier that separated them from the human. "This is what we're supposed to fear. Humans." His companions, Zark and Neth, slithered closer to join in the mockery. All 3 belonged to the Blood Fang assassin clan, one of the most feared criminal organizations in the Outer Rim. They had been arrested during a botched hit on a Terran diplomat, but their connections would have them out within hours. For now, they were enjoying themselves at the expense of their fellow prisoner. "I heard humans used to be warriors once," Zark said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Hard to believe, looking at this specimen. Marcus continued to stare straight ahead, seemingly oblivious to their presence. His breathing was slow and steady, almost meditative. He had been sitting in the same position for 3 hours, barely moving except to blink. "Hey, old man," Neth called out, tapping his claws against the energy barrier. "We're talking to you. Show some respect when your betters address you." Still no response. Marcus might as well have been carved from stone. The Krex were not accustomed to being ignored. In their culture, showing disrespect to a warrior clan was a serious offense, one typically answered with blood. But they couldn't reach through the barrier, and the human seemed completely unaware of their existence. "Maybe he's deaf," Vex suggested. "Or stupid. I've heard human minds deteriorate with age." "No," Zark said thoughtfully. "He's ignoring us on purpose. Thinks he's too good to acknowledge us." His voice took on a dangerous edge. "I don't like being ignored." The truth was that Marcus could hear every word they said. He understood their language perfectly. He understood most languages in this sector of the galaxy. But he had learned long ago that sometimes the best response was no response at all. Let them talk. Let them reveal themselves. Information was always more valuable than satisfaction. Besides, he had heard it all before. The mockery, the disrespect, the assumption that humans were weak and broken. It had been the same for 30 years, ever since the Treaty of Centauri had officially ended the Human-Krex War. The galaxy had decided that humanity was finished as a military power, relegated to minor trade routes and forgotten colonies. Most humans had accepted this new reality. They kept their heads down, worked their small jobs, and tried to blend into the background of galactic civilization. But Marcus Chun was not most humans. "I know what we should do," Vex said suddenly, his eyes lighting up with malicious inspiration. "When we get out of here, we should track down his family. Show them what happens when their kind disrespects us." That got a reaction. Marcus's eyes shifted slightly, the first movement he had made in hours. It was barely perceptible, but Zark caught it and smiled with predatory satisfaction. "Oh, do we hit a nerve?" he taunted. "Does the old human have family somewhere? A mate, perhaps? Offspring? I bet they're on one of those pathetic human colonies," Neth added, warming to the theme. "Living in fear, scraping by on whatever scraps the real powers of the galaxy allow them." It would be a mercy to put them out of their misery. Marcus closed his eyes and took a slow, deep breath. In his mind, he could see Sarah's face as clearly as if she were standing in front of him. His wife had been gone for 15 years now, claimed by the same plague that had swept through the outer colonies. But his daughter Elena was still out there, somewhere in the Kepler system, trying to build a life for herself and her own children. We could make it look like an accident, Vex continued, his voice taking on the clinical tone of a professional killer discussing his craft. Humans are so fragile. A pressure suit malfunction, perhaps, or maybe contaminated water supplies. So many ways for them to die without anyone asking questions. The other two Kreks nodded approvingly. They had all committed similar acts before. The elimination of entire families was considered a standard part of their profession. Send a message. Make sure everyone understood the consequences of crossing the Bloodfawn clan. Marcus opened his eyes and slowly turned his head to look at them. For the first time since they had started talking, he made direct eye contact. Something in his gaze made all three assassins take an involuntary step backward. Interesting, Marcus said quietly. His voice was calm and measured, with just a hint of an accent that suggested he had spent time in the core worlds. You know, in all my years, I've noticed that the ones who talk the most about killing families are usually the ones who've never faced a real enemy. Vex recovered first, his embarrassment at being startled fueling his anger. A real enemy? Like you, old man? You couldn't fight your way out of a waste disposal unit. Perhaps not. Marcus agreed with a slight nod. Age does have its disadvantages. Slower reflexes, weaker muscles, failing eyesight. He paused thoughtfully. But it also brings experience. And memory. Memory of what? Zark demanded. Your species' glorious defeat? Marcus smiled. And the expression was somehow more unsettling than his earlier silence had been. Memory of what happens to people who threaten my family. The casual confidence in his voice was disturbing. Here was a prisoner, trapped in a cell, facing three professional killers who could tear him apart with their bare claws. And he was speaking as if he held all the cards. You're delusional, Neth said, though there was less conviction in his voice than before. Humans are broken. Everyone knows that. You lost the war, and now you hide in the shadows like the pathetic creatures you are. The war, Marcus repeated, as if tasting the words. Yes, I remember the war. I remember a lot of things about the war that most people prefer to forget. A security guard, a bored-looking Centaurian with 4 arms, and a perpetual scowl wandered by on his rounds. He glanced at the group gathered around Marcus's cell, but didn't stop. Prisoners talking to each other was normal enough, and he had more important things to worry about than casual conversation. Tell us, old man, Vex said, his voice dripping with false curiosity. What great battles did you fight in? What glorious victories did your people achieve before they surrendered like cowards? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes unfocused as if he were looking at something very far away. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was still quiet, still controlled, but there was something underneath it now. Something cold and vast and very, very dangerous. I was at Proxima Beta, he said simply. And Kepler 7. New Geneva. The Titan asteroid field. He paused between each name, letting them sink in. Oh, and Krex Prime, of course. I was definitely at Krex Prime. The three assassins went very still. Every schoolchild in the galaxy knew those names. They were the sites of the most devastating battles of the Human-Krex War, conflicts that had reshaped the political landscape of 3-star systems. Billions had died in those engagements. Entire fleets had been annihilated, and whole planets had been left as smoking ruins. But Krex Prime was different. Krex Prime was personal. It had been the homeworld of the Krex species, a massive planet with over 50 billion inhabitants. During the final year of the war, something had happened there. Something so terrible that even 3 decades later, it was spoken of only in whispers. The official records were sealed, and most of the participants were dead. What everyone knew was that Krex Prime was gone. Not conquered, not occupied, gone. Where once there had been a thriving world, there was now nothing but an asteroid field and a radiation signature that would persist for thousands of years. That's impossible, Zark said, but his voice lacked conviction. Krex Prime was destroyed by a stellar weapon. No individual could have what? Marcus asked mildly. Could have designed the targeting systems for the solar collectors? Could have calculated the orbital mechanics needed to focus 3 stars worth of energy into a single coherent beam? Could have overridden the safety protocols that were supposed to prevent exactly that kind of catastrophe. He tilted his head slightly, studying their faces with the detached interest of a scientist observing specimens. You're right, of course. No individual could have done all of that. It would have required a team of experts, working in perfect coordination, with access to classified military databases and override codes that only a handful of people in the entire galaxy possessed. The cell block had gone quiet around them. Other prisoners had stopped their conversations to listen, drawn by something in Marcus's voice that spoke of vast and terrible things. But here's the interesting part. Marcus continued, leaning forward slightly. Do you know what they called the human who led that team? The one who turned your homeworld into cosmic dust. The 3 Krex assassins were no longer looking amused. They were staring at the old human with growing horror, pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place in their minds. They called him Planet Killer, Marcus said softly. Quite a dramatic name, really. But then, again, dramatic situations call for dramatic titles. Vex was the first to break. His legs gave out, and he collapsed to his knees in front of the cell, his eyes wide with terror. No, he whispered. You can't be. He's dead. They said he was dead. They said a lot of things, Marcus agreed. Most of them were lies designed to make people feel safer, to help them sleep at night without wondering what other monsters might be hiding in the dark. Neth and Zark were backing away now, their earlier confidence completely shattered. They had spent their entire lives building reputations as fearsome killers, but they were looking at something beyond their comprehension. A legend made flesh. A nightmare that had somehow grown old and gray and tired, but was no less dangerous for it. The records, Zark stammered. They said Planet Killer died in the final assault on Kepler Station, killed by Krex commandos. Marcus chuckled, and the sound was like ice cracking on a frozen lake. Marcus Chun died that day, it's true. The man who had a wife and friends and hopes for the future, he died along with everyone else on that station. But Planet Killer. He shook his head slowly. Planet Killer was never alive to begin with. Planet Killer was just a call sign, a job description. And jobs don't die, boys. They just wait for someone to pick them up again. The security guard was coming back around on his rounds, and the 3 Krex assassins quickly scattered, returning to their own cells with their heads down, and their tails literally between their legs. But Marcus could feel their eyes on him, could sense their fear like a living thing filling the cell block. Word would spread, he knew. It always did. By tomorrow, every prisoner on Kepler Station would know that there was something unusual in Cell Block 7. Something old and dangerous and best left alone. Marcus settled back against the wall and closed his eyes again. In a few hours, his lawyer would arrive with the bail payment, and he would walk out of this place a free man. The charges against him were minor, a bar fight that had gotten out of hand, nothing more. He would return to his small apartment on the civilian levels, back to his quiet life as a ship mechanic and occasional systems consultant. But first, he would need to make some inquiries about 3 young Krex assassins and their plans for his family. After all, some threats required a personal response. And Marcus Chin might be dead, but Planet Killer was eternal. The Rusty Comet Cantina on Kepler Station's civilian levels was exactly the kind of place where information was traded like currency and questions were rarely asked. Hidden in the depths of the station's industrial sector, it catered to mechanics, freight haulers, and the occasional off-duty security officer looking to forget about their troubles. The lighting was dim, the air thick with synthetic smoke, and the conversations were conducted in hushed tones. Marcus Chin sat at a corner table, nursing a glass of Terran whiskey that had probably been synthesized in a vat somewhere in the Outer Rim. He had been released from detention 6 hours ago, and his first stop had been his apartment to shower and change clothes. His second stop had been here, to have a conversation that was 30 years overdue. Across from him sat Director Sarah Okafor, a woman whose official title was Deputy Administrator for Civilian Affairs, but whose real job was far more interesting. She was younger than Marcus by at least 15 years, but her eyes held the kind of weariness that came from carrying secrets that could reshape the galaxy. "You look old, Marcus," she said, taking a sip of her own drink. Older than you should. Time has a way of catching up with all of us, he replied. Even those of us who thought we could outrun it. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. Outrun it. You've been hiding from it. There's a difference. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two old soldiers who had shared more battles than either cared to remember. Around them, the cantina's usual crowd went about their business, completely unaware that they were witnessing a reunion that could have implications across three-star systems. I heard about your encounter with the Blood Fong assassins, Sarah said eventually. Word travels fast in places like this. I'm sure it does. Marcus set down his glass and studied her face. The question is, how did you hear about it so quickly? And why are you here instead of safely tucked away in your administrative office? Sarah smiled, and for a moment, she looked like the young intelligence officer he had known during the war. You always were too smart for your own good. Yes, we've been monitoring you. Not because we don't trust you, she added quickly, seeing his expression, but because there are still people out there who would pay a great deal to know that Marcus Chun is alive and well. And how many people know the truth? About your survival? Maybe a dozen, scattered across the galaxy. About your real identity. She paused, choosing her words carefully. 3. Myself, Admiral Harrison, and Director Voss from Intelligence Division. Marcus nodded slowly. It was about what he had expected. The official story was that Planet Killer had died heroically in the final assault on Kepler Station, taking several Krex commandos with him. The reality was that Marcus had been evacuated along with other critical personnel when it became clear that the station was lost. But sometimes legends were more useful than truth. So what brings you out of retirement, Director? Marcus asked. I assume this isn't a social call. Sarah reached into her jacket and pulled out a small data pad, sliding it across the table. 3 days ago, one of our deep cover agents in the Blood Fong clan transmitted this before going dark. We think she's been compromised, but the information she died to get us is concerning. Marcus activated the data pad and began scrolling through the files. What he saw made his blood run cold. The Blood Fong clan wasn't just planning random assassinations anymore. They were coordinating with other criminal organizations across the galaxy, building something that looked suspiciously like a military alliance. More troubling, they had been recruiting heavily from former Krex military units, soldiers who still harbored deep resentments about their species' defeat in the war. But the most disturbing part was the target list. They're going after human colonies, Marcus said quietly. All of them. Not just going after them, Sarah corrected. They're planning to wipe them out completely. Men, women, children, no survivors. They want to finish what the war started. Marcus continued reading, his expression growing darker with each page. The plan was ambitious and terrifyingly thorough. Coordinated strikes on 17 human settlements, timed to occur simultaneously across multiple star systems. Each attack would be designed to look like an accident or natural disaster, making it difficult for the Earth government to justify a military response. How long do we have, he asked. 6 weeks, maybe 7. They're still positioning assets and recruiting additional personnel. But once they're ready, Sarah shrugged helplessly. We estimate they could eliminate over 60 million humans in a matter of days. Marcus closed the data pad and leaned back in his chair. Around them, the cantina's patrons continued their conversations, oblivious to the fact that the fate of humanity was being discussed at a table in the corner. What does Earth Command want me to do about it? He asked finally. Sarah laughed bitterly. Earth Command doesn't know about this. Officially, I'm on vacation, and you're a civilian mechanic who got into a bar fight. Unofficially, she leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Admiral Harrison thinks it's time to remind the galaxy why humans used to be feared. The Admiral always did have a romantic view of the old days, Marcus said dryly. But those days are over, Sarah. The war is over. The galaxy has moved on. Has it? Sarah challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like our enemies are planning genocide while we pretend that signing a peace treaty actually changed anything. She was right, and Marcus knew it. The Treaty of Centauri had ended open hostilities between humans and the Krex Empire, but it hadn't addressed the underlying tensions that had caused the conflict in the first place. If anything, the forced peace had simply driven those tensions underground, where they had festered and grown more virulent with time. Even if I agreed to help, Marcus said carefully. What exactly do you think one old man can accomplish against an organization with thousands of members spread across dozens of worlds? Sarah smiled. And this time there was real humor in it. Oh, Marcus, you really have been hiding for too long, haven't you? Do you think we haven't been preparing for this day? She activated her own datapad and showed him a series of files that made his eyes widen in surprise. Ghost Network, she said simply. The Admiral set it up 5 years after the war ended. Every human who served in special operations, every intelligence officer who went deep cover, every scientist who worked on classified projects. We've been keeping tabs on all of them. Most have been living quiet lives, just like you. But they're still out there, Marcus. And they're still loyal. Marcus scrolled through the list of names, recognizing many of them. These were some of the most dangerous humans who had ever lived, experts in everything from demolitions to psychological warfare to xenobiology. If even half of them were willing to come out of retirement. How many, he asked. Active and available? Maybe 200. Not a large army by conventional standards, but then, again, we were never a conventional army. Marcus thought about the 3 young Krex assassins he had encountered in detention. They had been so confident, so certain of their own superiority. Like most of the galaxy, they had forgotten that humanity's strength had never come from superior numbers or advanced technology. It had come from their willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect their own. There's something else you need to know, Sarah said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. The Bloodfawn clan has specifically targeted your daughter. Marcus went very still. Elena. She's been working as a terraforming engineer on New Damascus. Population about 2 million, mostly human families trying to build new lives away from the core worlds. It's scheduled to be the first target. For a moment, the cantina seemed to fade away around them. Marcus could feel something cold and terrible awakening in his chest, something he had spent 30 years trying to bury. The part of him that had calculated the orbital mechanics needed to destroy an entire planet. The part of him that had sleepwalked through the aftermath, surrounded by the ashes of 50 billion lives. They don't know who she is, Sarah continued. To them, she's just another target. But if you decide to get involved, if you start taking action against them, they'll figure it out eventually. And when they do, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus understood the implications perfectly. His daughter would become a target not because of anything she had done, but because of who her father was. Just like the families of every other Ghost Network operative who chose to answer the call. This is bigger than just revenge, Sarah said softly. This is about the survival of our species. But I won't lie to you, Marcus. If we do this, if we activate the network, there's no going back. We'll be starting a war that the galaxy thought was over. Marcus finished his drink and set the glass down carefully. When he looked up, his eyes had changed. They were still tired and lined with age, but there was something else there now. Something that had been sleeping for 30 years, waiting for the right moment to wake up. Tell me about the assets, he said quietly. Sarah smiled and began pulling up files on her datapad. Well, there's James Rodriguez on Kepler 7. He's been working as a cargo pilot, but his real specialty is electronic warfare. Give him access to a communications array and he can crash every computer system in a 3-system radius. She swiped to the next file. Lisa Park is running a small medical clinic on Proxima Station. Before the war, she was our leading expert in alien psychology. She wrote the manual on how to break a Krex interrogation. And Rebecca Thompson is teaching archaeology at the University of New Geneva. But she used to design infiltration routes for deep strike missions. I don't think there's a fortified position in the galaxy that she couldn't find a way into. Marcus listened as Sarah went through the list, each name bringing back memories of battles fought, and one against impossible odds. These were the people who had held the line when the galaxy was burning, who had made the hard choices that no one else was willing to make. What about weapons? He asked. That's the beauty of the network, Sarah replied. We don't need traditional weapons. Rodriguez can take down their communications. Park can turn their own psychological warfare against them. Thompson can get our people into places they never dreamed we could reach. And you? She paused, studying his face carefully. You can do what you do best. You can remind them why planets tremble when humans get angry. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering everything she had told him. Around them, the cantina continued its nightly routine, but he was no longer really present in that place. In his mind, he was already planning, calculating, considering possibilities and probabilities with the same cold precision that had once turned a thriving world into cosmic dust. "If I do this," he said finally, "if I activate the network, it won't be clean. It won't be surgical. When I'm finished, the Blood Fawn clan will be extinct, and anyone who helped them will wish they had never been born." Sarah nodded. "I know. And the galaxy will remember why they used to fear us." "I know that too." Marcus stood up from the table, his decision made. "Then, let's remind them." As they walked out of the cantina together, neither of them noticed the small surveillance drone that had been recording their conversation from a vent near the ceiling, or the fact that it immediately transmitted its data to a secure server in the Krex sector. The Blood Fawn clan would know within hours that Planet Killer was alive, and they would begin preparations for a war they thought they had already won. The abandoned mining facility on asteroid K-47 had been dead for over a decade, its automated systems powered down, and its corridors filled with the silent darkness of space. But tonight, it was very much alive. Deep in the facility's command center, a dozen figures gathered around a holographic display that showed the current positions of Blood Fawn assets across the galaxy. They were an unremarkable group at first glance. A cargo pilot with graying temples, a middle-aged woman in a medical uniform, an elderly man with the soft look of an academic. But anyone who looked closer would notice the way they moved with practiced precision, the way their eyes constantly scanned for threats, the way they seemed to communicate without words. These were the ghosts that humanity had left behind when the war ended. And now they were waking up. Marcus Chun stood at the center of the group, studying the tactical display with the same intensity he had once brought to planetary bombardment calculations. In the 3 weeks since his meeting with Sarah Okafor, the network had been working quietly to gather intelligence on their enemies. What they had discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. "Status report," Marcus said quietly. James Rodriguez, the cargo pilot, stepped forward first. His fingers danced across a portable computing unit as he spoke. "I've confirmed the locations of 73 Blood Fawn communication relays. They're using encrypted quantum entanglement channels, but the encryption is based on Krex military standards from the war. I wrote the countermeasures for those systems 30 years ago." Rebecca Thompson, the archaeology professor, nodded approvingly. "And I've identified their primary staging areas. They're using old Krex military bases that were supposedly decommissioned after the treaty. 17 locations across 8 systems, all connected by automated supply lines." "What about their leadership structure?" Marcus asked. Lisa Park consulted her own notes. The former psychological warfare specialist had spent weeks analyzing captured Blood Fawn communications and behavioral patterns. They're organized along traditional clan lines, with 3 primary war chiefs coordinating the operation: Vextar the Bloodthirsty, Zakmor the Ruthless, and Nethul the Merciless. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Subtle. Krex aren't known for their irony," Park replied dryly. "But the interesting thing is their psychological profile. They're not just motivated by revenge or territorial expansion. This is about proving something to themselves and their species. They genuinely believe that eliminating humanity will restore their warrior culture and make them respected again. Which means they won't stop with the colonies," observed Dr. David Kim, a xenobiologist who had once designed biological weapons specifically targeted at Krex physiology. "Even if we stop this attack, they'll just regroup and try again." Marcus nodded grimly. He had reached the same conclusion. The Blood Fawn clan represented something larger than a simple criminal organization. They were a symptom of the unresolved tensions that still existed between humans and the Krex Empire. As long as they survived, they would continue to be a threat. "Which brings us to our operational parameters," Marcus said. He gestured to the holographic display, which shifted to show a timeline of planned Blood Fawn attacks. "We have 18 days before they begin their coordinated assault on the human colonies. We can't stop them through conventional means. There are too many of them, spread across too wide an area." "So what do you propose?" asked Elena Martinez, a former Special Forces operative who had spent the last 20 years running a small farming cooperative. Marcus smiled, and several of the assembled ghosts unconsciously took a step back. They had seen that expression before, usually right before entire enemy fleets mysteriously disappeared. "We're going to do what we do best," he said simply. "We're going to make them afraid." The holographic display shifted again, this time showing the current locations of the 3 Blood Fawn war chiefs. All were heavily guarded, surrounded by loyal followers, and situated in what they undoubtedly considered to be impregnable strongholds. "Rodriguez, I need you to map their communication networks in detail. Not just the relays, but the backup systems, the emergency protocols, everything. When we move, I want them deaf and blind within the first 10 minutes. The electronic warfare specialist nodded. "Consider it done. Thompson, I need infiltration routes into all 3 strongholds. I don't care how impossible they seem. Find me a way in." "Already working on it," the archaeologist replied. "Give me 72 hours and a detailed scan of their defensive layouts. Park, I need psychological profiles on all 3 war chiefs. Fears, weaknesses, anything we can exploit. And I need you to design a campaign that will turn their own followers against them." The psychological warfare expert was already taking notes. "I'll need access to their personal communications and behavioral analysis data." Marcus turned to address the entire group. "We're not going to fight them conventionally. We're not going to give them the glorious battle they want. Instead, we're going to systematically dismantle their organization from within, turning their strengths into weaknesses and their allies into enemies." "What about collateral damage?" asked Dr. Kim quietly. It was the question that had been hanging in the air since they had all arrived on K-47. During the war, operations like this had often resulted in significant civilian casualties. Entire space stations had been sacrificed to achieve strategic objectives. Populated worlds had been rendered uninhabitable to deny resources to the enemy. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his response. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Our primary objective is to protect human lives. Everything else is secondary. If we have to choose between stopping the Blood Fawn clan and avoiding collateral damage." He paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "We stopped the Blood Fawn clan." It was the answer they had all expected, but hearing it spoken aloud still sent a chill through the room. They were being asked to become monsters again, to set aside 30 years of peaceful lives, and return to the darkness they had inhabited during the war. But they were also being asked to save their species. One by one, they nodded their agreement. "All right then," Marcus said. "Let's begin." The next 3 hours were spent in detailed planning sessions. Each member of the team contributed their expertise, building a comprehensive picture of Blood Fawn capabilities and vulnerabilities. By the time they were finished, they had developed a plan that was simultaneously elegant and terrifying in its scope. It would begin with targeted assassinations of key Blood Fawn leaders, designed to look like internal power struggles. Simultaneously, Rodriguez would begin introducing subtle errors into their communication networks, causing confusion and paranoia among the clan's scattered cells. Thompson's infiltration teams would plant evidence suggesting that various Blood Fawn commanders were planning to betray their allies, while Park's psychological warfare campaign would exploit the natural tendencies toward violence and suspicion that were part of Krek's culture. The end result would be the complete destruction of the Blood Fawn clan as an organized force, accomplished with minimal human casualties and maximum psychological impact. "There's one more thing," Marcus said as the meeting began to wind down. "Once we start this operation, there's no going back. The galaxy will know that humanity is capable of this kind of coordinated action. Some will see it as a return to our old ways. Others will see it as a necessary response to aggression. And some," added Sarah Okafor, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, "will see it as proof that humans are still the most dangerous species in the galaxy." Marcus nodded. "Which brings me to our final operational parameter. When this is over, when the Blood Fawn clan is nothing but a memory, the network goes back into hiding. We return to our civilian lives, and we pretend that this never happened. But we also remain ready." "Ready for what?" asked Martinez. "Ready for the next time someone decides that humanity is weak," Marcus replied. "Ready to remind them that some mistakes are only made once." As the meeting broke up and the ghosts began to disperse to their assigned tasks, Marcus remained behind to study the tactical displays. In 18 days, The Bloodfawn clan would learn why their ancestors had called humans the Deathbringers from beyond the void. They would discover that some species were too dangerous to be prey, and that some old soldiers never really retired. But first, Marcus had a personal matter to attend to. The three young assassins who had threatened his family were still on Kepler Station, having been released on bail pending their trial for attempted murder. They had no idea that their casual threats had set in motion events that would reshape the criminal underworld of three-star systems. Marcus activated a secure communication channel and sent a brief message to Rodriguez. Within hours, the electronic warfare specialist would have complete access to the trio's personal communications, financial records, and daily routines. By tomorrow, Marcus would know everything about them, where they lived, where they worked, who they cared about, and what they feared. Then, he would pay them a visit. After all, some lessons were best taught personally, and Planet Killer had always been a very good teacher. Vextar the Bloodthirsty was not having a good week. The Bloodfawn war chief sat in his private chambers aboard the clan's flagship, staring at a series of reports that made less sense with each passing hour. 3 of his most trusted lieutenants had been found dead in what appeared to be accidents. One from a malfunctioning atmospheric processor, another from a defective gravity generator, and the third from what investigators claimed was food poisoning. But Vextar had not survived 40 years of clan warfare by believing in coincidences. Status report, he growled to his aide, a nervous young Krex named Silda who had been increasingly jumpy over the past few days. Another communication relay has gone offline, War Chief, Silda replied, consulting his data pad with shaking hands. That makes 7 in the past week. Engineering claims it's a cascade failure in the quantum entanglement matrix, but you don't believe them, Vextar finished, his yellow eyes fixed on the aide with predatory intensity. Neither do I. The truth was that everything had started to go wrong 3 days after the incident on Kepler Station. At first, it had been minor problems, communication delays, supply shipments arriving late, routine equipment failures. But the problems had escalated quickly, and now Vextar was beginning to suspect that they were under attack by an enemy he couldn't see. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. Vextar activated the secure holographic projector, expecting to see one of his fellow war chiefs. Instead, he found himself looking at the weathered face of an elderly human. "Good evening, Vextar," Marcus Chin said politely. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Vextar's blood went cold. Every Krex in the galaxy knew that face from the war archives, even though it was supposed to belong to a dead man. The legendary Planet Killer, the human who had turned their homeworld into cosmic dust, was sitting calmly in what appeared to be a small ship's communications center. "Impossible," Vextar whispered. "You're dead." "Death," Marcus replied thoughtfully, "is a surprisingly flexible concept. But we're not here to discuss philosophy. We're here to discuss the future of your clan." Around the flagship's bridge, alarms began to sound. The communication relay that had been handling their secure channels had just gone completely offline, along with the backup systems and the emergency protocols. Within seconds, Vextar's forces were cut off from each other, isolated in their individual ships and stations. "What have you done?" the war chief demanded. "I've given you my complete attention," Marcus said simply. "Something that very few beings have received and lived to tell about it." He leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. "Now then, let's talk about your plans for human colonies." On 17 different worlds, in 63 separate facilities, the same scene was playing out. Bloodfawn commanders were watching in growing horror as their carefully planned operation fell apart around them. Communication networks were failing, supply lines were being severed, and key personnel were dying in accidents that were becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence. War Chief Zach Moore the Ruthless found himself trapped in his own command bunker when the security systems malfunctioned, sealing all exits and flooding the facility with an inert gas that left him conscious but helpless. When the holographic transmission from Planet Killer appeared, he was tied to a chair in his own conference room, surrounded by the bodies of his closest advisors. War Chief Nethel the Merciless was aboard his personal cruiser when every system on the ship simultaneously suffered critical failures. Life support continued to function, but engines, weapons, shields, and communications were all offline. When Marcus appeared on his emergency display, Nethal was floating in zero gravity in a completely powerless vessel. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, addressing all three war chiefs simultaneously through separate transmissions, "let me be absolutely clear about your current situation. Your organization is finished. Your plans are known to us in detail. Your forces are scattered and demoralized. And your lives are entirely dependent on my continued goodwill." Vextar tried to speak, but Marcus held up a hand for silence. "However, I'm not an unreasonable person. I understand that you've invested considerable time and resources in your current operation, and I'm prepared to offer you an alternative." The holographic display shifted, showing detailed schematics of blood-fong facilities across the galaxy. But these weren't intelligence estimates. They were perfect, real-time representations of every base, every ship, every staging area the clan had established. "You have 18 hours to issue orders for the complete cessation of all operations against human targets," Marcus continued. "Your forces will withdraw from all positions, your weapons will be surrendered to local authorities, and your leadership will submit to arrest by Terran Federation marshals." "And if we refuse?" Nethal managed to ask. Marcus smiled, and the expression was somehow more terrifying than any threat he could have made. "Then I will demonstrate why 50 billion Kreks chose death over surrender when they saw what was coming for their homeworld." The transmission ended, leaving the three war chiefs alone with their thoughts and their fear. But the real message wasn't being delivered to the Bloodfong leadership. It was being broadcast across every criminal network, every mercenary company, every pirate clan that had ever considered humans to be easy prey. The transmission was brief, lasting only 30 seconds, but it would be remembered for decades. It showed Marcus Chun sitting in a simple chair, his hands folded in his lap, speaking directly to the camera with the calm confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. "My name is Marcus Chun," he said quietly. "Some of you may know me by another name. For 30 years, I have lived peacefully among you, hoping that the galaxy had learned the lessons of our last conflict. But it seems that some of you have forgotten what happens when humans are threatened." He paused, letting the words sink in. "So let me remind you, we are not the broken species you think we are. We are not defeated. We are not weak. We are sleeping. And you really, really don't want to wake us up." The image shifted to show the current status of Bloodfong operations across the galaxy. Every facility was marked with a red indicator, showing that it was currently under attack or had already been neutralized. 63 separate installations, taken down simultaneously by an enemy that none of them had seen coming. "This is what 12 humans can accomplish in a single week when properly motivated," Marcus continued. "Imagine what we could do with 100, or 1,000, or the entire population of our colonies, fighting to protect their families." The display changed again, this time showing the locations of various criminal organizations that had been known to target human interests. Each was marked with a slowly pulsing yellow dot. "You have a choice," Marcus said. "You can continue to see humanity as prey, in which case you will discover that some prey is more dangerous than the predator. Or you can choose to coexist peacefully, in which case you will never see us again." The transmission ended with a final image that would become legendary throughout the criminal underworld. It was a simple star chart showing the location of the former Krek's homeworld, with a timestamp indicating that it had been taken exactly 30 years ago. Below it was a single line of text: "Choose wisely. Planet Killer." Within hours, every major criminal organization in 3-star systems had issued new policies regarding human targets. Most simply declared humans to be off-limits for any operations. Others went further, offering protection services to human colonies and trade routes. But the Bloodfong clan chose defiance. Vextar the Bloodthirsty spent the 18-hour deadline rallying what remained of his forces, declaring that no human, no matter how legendary, could threaten the mighty Bloodfong clan. He commanded his surviving ships to continue with the original plan, to show the galaxy that Krek's warriors would not be intimidated by ghosts and old men. It was a decision he would regret for the remaining 6 hours of his life. The attack came at exactly 1800 hours station time, precisely when Marcus had promised it would. There were no warnings, no last-minute negotiations, no opportunities for surrender. The Ghost Network had given the Bloodfong clan their chance to choose peace, and that chance had been rejected. Now they would experience what war looked like when humanity was truly motivated. Vextar's flagship simply vanished from sensor readings, along with his entire escort fleet. One moment they were there, the next they were gone, leaving behind only a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated plasma. The other war chiefs suffered similar fates. Their strongholds were reduced to rubble by weapons that no one saw coming, delivered by attackers who seemed to materialize out of empty space. But the most terrifying part wasn't the destruction itself. It was the precision. Every single Bloodfawn facility was eliminated within a 10-minute window. Every leader, every lieutenant, every foot soldier who had participated in the planned attack on human colonies was killed with surgical accuracy. But their families were left untouched. Their civilian associates were unharmed. Even their non-combatant support staff were allowed to surrender and walk away. It was a demonstration of power that was both absolute and controlled, showing the galaxy that humans could destroy their enemies completely while still maintaining their moral principles. It was a message that would be remembered long after the last Bloodfawn warrior had been forgotten. In the aftermath, as various galactic governments tried to make sense of what had happened, a single communication was sent to the Earth Federation Council. It came from an encrypted source and contained only 3 words: mission accomplished. Network, but Marcus Chun was already gone, having disappeared back into the civilian population as quietly as he had emerged from it. The galaxy would spend months trying to track down the other members of the Ghost Network, but they would find only mechanics and teachers, doctors and farmers, ordinary humans living ordinary lives. The monsters had returned to their sleep, but they were still there, waiting in the shadows, ready to remind the galaxy that some species were too dangerous to hunt. And somewhere in the Outer Rim, on a small colony world called New Damascus, a terraforming engineer named Elena Chun continued her work of building new worlds for humanity's children, never knowing how close she had come to death, or that her father had moved heaven and Earth to keep her safe. 5 years later, the rusty comet cantina looked exactly the same as it always had. The same dim lighting, the same synthetic smoke hanging in the air, the same conversations conducted in hushed tones by people who preferred to keep their business private. But for those who knew what to look for, there were subtle differences. The human patrons were treated with a level of respect that bordered on deference. Conversations grew quieter when they entered the room, and certain topics of discussion, specifically anything involving attacks on human interests, were simply never mentioned. Marcus Chin sat at his usual corner table, nursing his usual glass of whiskey and reading a technical manual on atmospheric processors. To any casual observer, he was just another aging mechanic, perhaps contemplating retirement to one of the outer colonies where the work was easier and the pace of life was slower. But the 3 young beings at the table across from him knew better. "That's him," whispered Kara, a Centaurian smuggler who couldn't have been more than 25 standard years old. "That's actually him." Her companions, a human trader named Jackson and a Krex pilot called Veltar, leaned in closer to hear her words. All 3 were part of the newer generation of criminals and gray market operators who had grown up hearing stories about the legendary Planet Killer, but none of them had ever expected to see him in person. "Are you sure?" Jackson asked, stealing glances at the elderly man in the corner. He looked so ordinary. Veltar's scales rippled with nervous energy. As a member of the Krex species, he had been raised on stories about the human who had destroyed their homeworld. To his people, Planet Killer was the embodiment of humanity's capacity for absolute destruction, a boogeyman used to frighten children and a reminder of why Krex should never again underestimate their former enemies. "It's him," the young Krex said with certainty. "I've studied every image, every recording, every piece of historical data about the human Krex war. That is Marcus Chun, the man who killed 50 billion of my people." Kara shuddered. "What do you think he's doing here?" "Same thing he's been doing for the last 5 years, Jackson replied. "Living quietly, fixing atmospheric systems, and pretending to be retired." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "The question is, why are we talking about this? I mean, it's not like we're planning to bother him or anything, right?" The 3 young criminals exchanged nervous glances. They had indeed been planning to approach Marcus, not to threaten him, but to offer him a business proposition. Their organization, a mid-level smuggling operation called the Star Runners, had been having problems with a rival gang that specialized in hitting human cargo convoys. They had hoped that the legendary planet killer might be willing to provide some advice, or perhaps even direct assistance. Now, sitting in the same room with him, that plan seemed considerably less appealing. Maybe we should just leave, Veltar suggested. Find another cantina, have our meeting somewhere else. But, before they could move, Marcus Chin looked up from his technical manual and made direct eye contact with them. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then, the old human smiled and gestured for them to approach his table. You know, Marcus said as the three young beings reluctantly made their way over. When people want to talk about someone, they should probably do it more quietly. Sound carries in places like this. Kara, who seemed to be the leader of the group, managed to find her voice first. Mr. Chun, we're sorry to bother you. We wanted to ask me for help with the Iron Claw gang, Marcus finished calmly. Yes, I've been monitoring your communications for the past week. Impressive encryption, by the way. Whoever designed your security protocols has real talent. Jackson blinked in surprise. You've been monitoring our communications? Old habits, Marcus replied with a shrug. When three criminals start spending time in my neighborhood, I like to know what they're planning. It's nothing personal, just basic security precautions. He gestured for them to sit down, an invitation that felt more like a command. The three young beings took their seats reluctantly, trying not to stare too obviously at the man who had become a living legend. So, Marcus continued, the Iron Claw gang has been hitting your shipments, and you want my advice on how to deal with them. Is that about right? Veltar nodded nervously. They've cost us 3 major shipments in the past month. Our clients are getting impatient, and our reputation is suffering. We heard that you might be willing to consult on this type of problem. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying their faces with the calm attention of someone who had spent decades reading people's intentions and motivations. What he saw was interesting. 3 young criminals who were trying very hard to be respectful and professional, despite their obvious fear. The Iron Claw gang, he said thoughtfully, specializes in hitting small operations that can't fight back effectively. They use intimidation and superior firepower to force their victims into submission. Standard pirate tactics, really. Yes, sir, Kara said eagerly. That's exactly what they do. We've tried hiring additional security, but they just bring more ships. We've tried changing our routes, but they seem to have good intelligence sources. We're running out of options. Marcus nodded slowly. And you thought that planet killer might be able to help you solve your problem. The way he said his own legendary name made all 3 of them uncomfortable. There was something unsettling about hearing those words spoken so casually, as if he were discussing the weather rather than one of the most feared identities in the galaxy. We understand if you're not interested, Jackson said quickly. We know you're retired, and we respect that. We just thought. You thought that I might be willing to relive my glory days by wiping out another group of criminals, Marcus interrupted. You thought that maybe the old monster would enjoy one more chance to remind the galaxy why humans are dangerous. The 3 young beings exchanged worried glances. When he put it that way, their request sounded presumptuous and more than a little insulting. That's not how we meant it, Veltar said carefully. We need help. And you're the only person we know who has experience dealing with these kinds of problems. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering their request. Around them, the cantina continued its nightly routine, but the other patrons were giving their table a wide berth. Word had spread quickly that Planet Killer was having a conversation with 3 young criminals, and nobody wanted to be caught in the crossfire if things went badly. Tell me something, Marcus said finally. What do you know about the Iron Claw gang's leadership structure? Kara consulted her data pad. They're run by a Vortian named Griktar and his lieutenant, a human called Sarah Morrison. They have maybe 30 ships, and about 200 personnel total. And what do you know about their operational philosophy? They prefer easy targets, Jackson replied. Low-risk, high-reward operations. They avoid anything that might result in serious casualties among their own people. Marcus nodded approvingly. Good intelligence. Now, based on that information, what do you think would happen if they learned that the Star Runners were under the protection of someone with a reputation for excessive violence? The 3 young criminals looked at each other, beginning to understand where the conversation was heading. They'd probably decide we weren't worth the risk, Veltar said slowly. Exactly, Marcus agreed. The Iron Claw gang stays in business by picking fights they know they can win. If they thought that attacking you might result in the kind of retaliation that destroys entire organizations. He shrugged. Well, pirates are many things, but they're rarely stupid. Kara leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement. So you'll help us? I already have helped you, Marcus replied calmly. This conversation has been recorded by at least 6 different surveillance systems in this cantina. By tomorrow morning, everyone in the criminal underworld will know that the Star Runners had a private meeting with Planet Killer. The Iron Claw gang will hear about it within hours. He finished his drink and stood up from the table. I suggest you go about your business as usual for the next few days. Continue planning your shipments, continue operating normally. But don't be surprised if the Iron Claw gang suddenly develops other priorities. As Marcus prepared to leave, Jackson worked up the courage to ask the question that had been bothering him since the beginning of their conversation. Mr. Chun, can I ask you something personal? Marcus paused, looking back at the young human with mild curiosity. Do you ever regret it? What you did during the war, I mean. Do you ever wish you could take it back? For a moment, Marcus's carefully controlled expression flickered, revealing something deeper and more complex than the calm professionalism he usually projected. When he spoke, his voice was softer, more thoughtful. Every day, he said simply, I regret the necessity of it. I regret that the galaxy forced us into a position where such actions became inevitable. I regret that 50 billion beings had to die because their leaders couldn't accept that humans have the right to exist. He paused, looking out through the cantina's small viewport at the stars beyond. But I don't regret protecting my people. I don't regret ensuring that humanity survived. And I don't regret making it clear to the galaxy that some species are too dangerous to hunt. He looked back at Jackson with eyes that held depths of experience the young man could barely imagine. The galaxy is a safer place for humans now than it was before the war. Sometimes that's the best you can hope for. Marcus left the cantina without another word, disappearing into the crowd of beings that filled the station's corridors. The 3 young criminals sat in silence for several minutes, processing what had just happened. Well, Kara said finally, that was terrifying and educational. Do you think it will work? Jackson asked. Will the Iron Claw gang really back off just because of this conversation? Veltar's scales rippled with what might have been amusement. Let me put it this way. If someone told you that your target was under the personal protection of the being who destroyed an entire planet, would you still be interested in robbing them? The answer to that question came 3 days later, when the Star Runners received a formal communication from the Iron Claw gang. It was brief and to the point. All operations against Star Runner convoys were being permanently suspended, and the gang would be withdrawing from their current territory to avoid any potential conflicts. Within a week, similar messages were being sent to smuggling operations across the sector. The mere possibility that Planet Killer might be taking an interest in the activities of local criminal organizations was enough to reshape the entire criminal landscape. And, in a small apartment on the civilian levels of Kepler Station, Marcus Chun continued his quiet retirement, reading technical manuals and occasionally taking consulting jobs that helped pay the bills. He had no idea that his daughter Elena had recently been promoted to chief terraforming engineer for the entire new Damascus system, or that his grandchildren were excelling in their studies at the colony's finest schools. But he did know that humanity was safe. The galaxy had learned its lesson about threatening human interests, and the Ghost Network remained ready to deliver another lesson if necessary. Some legends, he reflected, were useful things to have lying around. Even if the people living them wished they could just be ordinary human beings instead of instruments of galactic peace through superior firepower. Outside his window, the stars continued their ancient dance, carrying ships full of humans to new worlds and new opportunities. And somewhere in the darkness between those stars, other species watched and remembered why it was important to leave humanity alone. The monster was sleeping again. But monsters, by their very nature, were light sleepers. And some nightmares were worth preserving, because they were the only things standing between civilization and chaos.